You would have seen my biographical background in the flyer that went out, but I'll just share. I've been hard of hearing since the age of 3.5, and that was from scarlet fever. So I'm a hard of hearing individual, and I'm grown up as hard of hearing. I got my master's degree and PhD in audiology. And so with that, I was an audiologist in a school in Montreal where I grew up for 5 years, working with deaf and hard of hearing children. And that was after my master's, got my PhD, and then I became a director and a vice president eventually in one of the largest hearing speech clinics in the country. So I was a consumer, or I am a consumer, been an audiologist and administrator, as well as also doing some audiology there. And then I got my PhD, and then eventually I became a professor at Gallaudet University for 10 years. And so I've run the gamut that way. I've also was a founding member of what's called the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, a founding board member, of which there were six of us, and that is analogous to the Hearing Loss Association of America for the United States, as well as being a professional advisor for HLAA. And so I've been kind of lucky to do everything or most. I've been exposed to many different things: clinician, consumer, professor, advocate. So that's kind of my background. My actual specialty, of which I'm known for, is evaluating individuals' processing difficulties. And usually or almost always it's done with individuals who have hearing within normal limits. So I've evaluated children and adults with learning difficulties or learning disabilities, autism, ADHD, etc. There, and there's difficulty trying to do it with hard of hearing people because the nature of hearing loss is so different that there's difficulty to have norms. But today I've been asking Russell to talk to me about this for quite a while. Um, in terms of it's not just hearing, when you listen to others speaking, hearing is just the initial part. And you can have, and I'll show two people with the same hearing loss, and yet one can do so much better than the other, be it their hearing or speech reading ability. So today I'm going to talk about how hearing loss can impact your ability to process and understand others, but also we're going to talk about aging, because aging can result in also impacting on people's ability to listen and process what others say. So I'm not going to really be talking about those who have hereditary disorders. I'm just going to be talking about what might happen if you develop a hearing loss or aging. But again, remember, when you get older, people age in different ways, and some have more difficulty than others. So it's not uniform that way. So now I'm going to share the presentation and we'll start. Okay, so I have to just go. Okay. So here is a topic, as you know, and if you would like to eventually reach out to me if you have questions, this is my email address, so you can always reach me if you have questions after. Okay, so each individual has their own internal capabilities when they're involved in the process of listening to others. You bring your own familiarity with language being spoken, be it your first language, like let's say I'm talking English, that's your native language, or secondary. And we know from research, even who might look like a very fluent bilingual, they will have difficulty if someone talks very quickly or in background noise. I can't go into the details, but it's easier to process, especially in noise, if you're listening in your first language. You bring your world knowledge into play, what you've learned. So adults have more capability than children, especially when topics are unfamiliar, but you can fill in with world knowledge. And children don't have that ability as well. And you have your own hearing. What is your hearing ability? You bring that into play. and your cognitive processing. These are the factors that each person brings in when they're listening to someone else. So even before a person begins to talk, the listener will successfully process information if they decide to focus on who the target talker is. Like, for example, if you're a child in kindergarten, the person you're supposed to focus is the teacher. And when you don't, you get in trouble. So, you're going to be more successful if you're actually thinking and listening and focusing on who you're supposed to and ignoring everything else. So that's not an actual hearing or listening skill. It's a cognitive skill, deciding what you're going to listen to and be successful at that. You'll also benefit from knowledge of the topic beforehand. Research that my professor and I did when I was doing my PhD shows that when you look at people listening to sentence material without knowledge of topic or with knowledge of topic, those who have a hearing loss did much better when they were told the topic beforehand. They knew the topic was said, like, this is going to be about the weather, this is going to be about sports. That knowledge helps you by allowing you to know what, if there are certain words you might not have heard correctly, you can maybe figure it out just from the knowledge topic. And that's why it's important whenever you talk to, in a presentation or to others, to make sure that others know the topic. So successful listening actually entails factors that don't even involve the person even talking yet. It's what you already are doing even before or aware of before the person begins to talk. So now we're going to talk about the process of spoken, what I call spoken language processing, the ability to process and understand language when it's in a spoken form. So when people talk, they create auditory stimuli like sound waves that ultimately, and I'm going to show you a quick graphic of neural electric impulses, and it will travel. And I hope you have some background. If not, I'll just briefly highlight that in terms of what the peripheral auditory system. So sound will enter the ear canal, that's the outer, and then it will go to the middle and inner ear, and then it will eventually be transmitted to what's called a higher order central auditory nervous system. Central means beyond the auditory nerve. We're talking about the central auditory, so beyond the auditory nerve, but going into brain structures that are going to process sound. So here is just a little graphic, and I don't have much time to discuss it, but I'll share this with you. So sound travels in the ear canal. It'll cause the eardrum attached at the end of the ear canal to vibrate. Inside the eardrum's really four layers of skin, and in between two of the layers is the first of the three little tiny bones in the ear called ossicles. And then the last bone, layman term, stirrup, scientific stapes, is connected to the inner ear, a bony structure that looks like a snail. Inside that bony structure is what's called the cochlea. And again, I could spend a half hour just explaining the cochlea, but no time to do so. But the cochlea contains thousands of hair cells that will respond to different pitch sounds. And attached to each, the cochlea has hair cells, thousands of hair cells. Each hair cell responds to a sound, and then connected to each hair cell is what's called the cochlear nerve. Now, the cochlear nerve also joined up what's called the vestibular nerve. So you see what's called the vestibular cochlear nerve. Vestibular means balance organs. They come together and then they join or enter what's called the brain stem, which is just above the spine. It's the lowest part of your brain structure. And then sound will travel up different pathways, eventually reaching the auditory receiving centers in each hemisphere. Now, the cochlea is comprised of both inner and outer hair cells, and I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute or two. So, the inner hair cells are the ones that will convert or take what was found, and they become neural impulses. And these neural impulses are going to be relayed to the cochlear nerve. That is from the inner ear to the nerve that will bring the sound to the brainstem. Now, when an inner hair cell is activated, and that is activated by an auditory stimulus of the corresponding frequency, as I said, each inner hair cell is specific to responding to a particular frequency. And when it's activated, it releases chemicals known as neurotransmitters. And this is how your brain functions. Neurons communicate with the other neurons through neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters in turn will activate the cochlear nerve fibers that are attached to that particular specific inner hair cell. So you have the inner hair cell releasing chemicals, and the chemicals will then stimulate or activate the corresponding cochlear nerve fiber. Now, so that was the inner hair cell. That's actually the hair cells that send the information to the brain. The outer hair cells are different in terms of their function from the inner hair cells. The importance of the outer hair cells is that they help amplify the sound up to 40 decibels. So they work with the inner hair cells, but the inner hair cells by themselves do not become activated until like greater than 40 decibels. So you need the outer hair cells uh, to be present to work with the inner hair cells so that you can hear very soft sound. That is like whispers or very, very soft sounds. And so if you lose those outer hair cells, then that will result in a possibly mild or a moderate hearing loss, meaning that you will not be able to hear soft speech, whispers, like a sparrow chirping. So because the inner hair cells by themselves cannot respond to sounds less than 40 decibels. Again, I don't know, and I don't know if people have learned the audiogram, but 0 to 25 is normal hearing, very soft, and 25 to 40 is considered like soft sounds. So if you lose hearing there, you'll have a mild or moderate hearing loss. And I'm going to show you a picture in a second of inner and outer hair cells. And then from but the outer hair cells not only responsible to helping you hear the sound, they also have neural pathways that connect from in your brain, which controls attention. These pathways connect to these outer hair cells. And when you want to listen to a particular sound and ignore other sounds, by paying attention and what you want to listen to, these pathways will cause these outer hair cells to block out sounds or minimize how loud sound that you don't want to hear. And so if you lose outer hair cells, not only will you have trouble hearing soft sounds, you will also have increased difficulty being able to listen to someone in the presence of background noise because you won't be as effective as filtering out or blocking sounds you don't want to hear. Okay, so loss of the inner hair cell by yourself on top of the outer hair cell mean that you're going to have hearing loss even greater than 40. You're going to have a severe hearing loss, possibly a profound hearing loss. So just losing the outer hair cells is only a mild moderate, but if you lose those inner hair cells, you're going to have greater degrees of hearing loss. And so the loss of outer or inner hair cells is referred to as a sensory hearing loss. I don't know, and I wish I had time to ask each of you, have you ever heard of what's called a sensory neural hearing loss? Because an audiologist should tell you that's what you have. But the sensory part of it is when you lose the outer or inner hair cell. That's the sensory part of the sensory neural hearing loss. So here is a picture of a normal inner ear. You have a row of inner hair cells, and what you're seeing here is not the hair cells themselves. They're little tiny hairs that are on top of each hair cell. So you see all these little hairs are standing up straight, and they're all there. And then you have 3 rows of outer hair cells that look like a V shape or a U shape. And you see there all the little hairs on top of the hair cells are all there. So that's a good normal looking ear. On the other hand, if you have a hearing loss, then usually what you'll lose are the outer hair cells first. So you'll start developing a mild hearing loss. And you see here, you're seeing not such nice V, but you're seeing either hair cells missing or you're in different places, or you'll see the little hairs on top of them flattened out. And the fact when I look at the inner hair cell, they don't look as nice or as having as many little hairs on top. So this person likely has a moderate to a moderate severe hearing loss. And that can be due to either infections, hereditary issues, or due to loud noise damaging the hair cells. So that's what an inner ear looks like when it's damaged. Now, something that's important that to know is that people can have similar audiogram. An audiogram is a test form that shows you how well you heard different frequencies, how soft you could hear. And people can have similar thresholds, similar hearing when you look at how well they hear these little beeps or pure tones. So you could look at it and say, hey, these two people look identical. And yet one person expresses much more difficulty hearing than the other in terms of listening or problems understanding others. And that's because you can, there are like, in terms of inner hair cells, like 10,000 inner hair cells, and there are thousands of outer hair cells. And although the audiogram might look the same, one person can have lost a lot more hair cells than the other person. And um, what happened is the reason why you could have similar audiograms or similar test results in terms of your how soft you can hear sound, because and I think most of you know who've had, if you wear a hearing aid or have an implant, is that when a person tests, the audiologist tests you with tone, they'll present a beep, and they'll present at 1,000, which is in the middle frequency, or 250, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000. So they're testing tones usually in octave bands, but they're not testing you all in between those sounds. Also, you only need a few inner hair cells to actually hear a tone. So it's possible, and we know this from research, that some individuals will have significantly more outer or inner hair cell loss, and yet still will be able to have the same thresholds. And there's an implication of that, and we're going to talk about. So, what happens if you have less hair cells? Why do you have more difficulty? And the reason is the resolution, the ability to hear those fine differences between speech sound may be poorer the more hair cells you've lost. Just think of going back to the 1960s or 70s, the older television sets, especially if you didn't have the cable wasn't around then, and pretend you either had a very small antenna or no antenna at all, and you were watching a TV show from many miles away. That picture was not that clear. You can turn up, make it brighter, but it still wouldn't be any clearer. And the reason is that the resolution, how many pixels, how many dots that could convey the picture was less. But now with the new TVs, you'll see the original was 1080 and then 4K, and now we have 8K. The picture, and I go to BJ's or Best Buy, and I just love standing in front of a TV. The picture, they're so sharp, they look better than what I see in real life now. So the more hair cells you have, the better and easier it is to hear all of the different aspects of speech sounds. And if you lose more hair cells, you're going to have greater listening difficulties. So now we're leaving the inner ear and we're going into the cochlear nerve. So the various nerve fibers that connect to the inner hair cell, as I said, each inner hair cell has a nerve fiber that connects to it, not directly, but just pretend it does. And then they all come together to form what's called the cochlear nerve, or a lot of people use the term auditory nerve, but the auditory nerve really has the cochlear and the balance nerve together. In order to be able to represent those stimuli that come in that you have to listen to with high fidelity, it can only happen, even if you have normal hearing, it can only happen if those nerve fibers fire in synchrony, in a synchronized fashion that not only reflects the frequencies, but they have to reflect the timing of the different aspects of each speech sound. And to explain speech, I'm going to show something, but this is only a simple graphic I'm going to show you in a few seconds. So if you lose a number of those nerve fibers, either sometimes it happens because of a tumor, it can happen because of an infection, it can happen hereditarily, or a disease. If you lose either nerve fibers or you lose what's called the myelin sheath. Nerves have myelin, which is made of fatty substance. It's what allows nerves to send signals quickly, and it's not only in the brain, but all throughout your body. So, for example, in multiple sclerosis, it's a disease that loses the myelin sheath. And depending where you lose it, you're going to have poorer function. It could affect your vision, it could affect your motor skills, it can even affect your auditory processing. So this myelin enhances the speed of neurotransmission. And if you lose either that or the nerve fibers, then the firing becomes degraded. The nerve firing becomes degraded, not synchronized. And then it's not going to allow the brain to receive a clear representation of what the sound really was. And that can happen even if there is no hearing loss. There are individuals out there who have very, very poor nerve representation, and they have normal outer hair cells. They have the inner hair cells are pretty okay too, and yet they look like they're profoundly deaf because it's like you're cutting a wire. Even if the sound came in, but if you cut that wire, the sound's not going to go anywhere, and that can happen to certain individuals. And this is what we call the neural hearing loss. Before we talk loss of the hair cells and sensory loss, when you have loss or degradation of the nerve fiber, that's the neural hearing loss. So the extent in which the cochlear nerve fibers may be degraded is another reason why you may have individuals who differ in their listening abilities from those with similar hearing loss. So you can have similar hearing loss, but if one has all their nerve fibers intact, they're going to do much better than another individual who not only has some hair cell loss, but also the nerve fibers are not functioning in the way they're supposed to send the information to the brain. And for those who have cochlear implants, it's the reason why some individuals will be very successful with cochlear implant and others not as successful or not successful at all. It depends on your nerve survival. So those individuals who have lost their inner hair cells but have good nerve supply, they'll be maybe do great with their implants, but other people may not do so well because their nerve survival is not as good. So now we're leaving. We've left the inner ear cochlea, we've gone into the cochlear nerve, and now we are into the brain stem. So it's the level of the brain stem that you're going to be able to determine where a sound is in space, the sources of sound origins, localization. So the brainstem is how you can localize the individual sound. So if you heard a car coming from your left, you're going to know, shoot, I got to move to my right or I got to move backwards. Or if someone's talking from you, you're going to be able to figure out, hopefully, where they are in space. And that happens because the sound enters both ears, and from the ears and the neural impulses that get to the brainstem, the brain will compare what's coming from the right and left ear to tell you where sounds are coming from. In addition, if you have more than one sound, for example, if you're in a party or in a restaurant, you may have a number of people talking, and each person is their own sound source. And the the brain can figure out where the different sounds are originating and can separate them in your brain in space. They don't just become mixed in only. The brain can separate the sound sources. And the ability, and this ability to separate the different sound sources is by comparing the time of arrival at the ear and the difference in loudness at the ears at the level of the brainstem. And so where a sound arrives earlier or same, or if it sounds louder or not, will depend on where the sound in space relative to the ears of the listener. So this will show more clearly. So if you can see here, here's a loudspeaker. Let's say you're listening to a stereo or somebody was talking, pretend. Then the sound will go through space, and because it's closer to the right ear, the sound will arrive at the right ear before the left ear. Now that difference is in microseconds, yet the brain can pick up that difference. So the brain, by comparing how much earlier it happened to the right and left, can figure out where in space it is. Also, as it reaches the right ear first, and then to go around to the left, it's got to bypass the head, and some of the sounds are being blocked, especially in the high frequencies. Then what happens is the sound in the right ear is louder than the left. So the brain will compare the difference in intensity and time to be able to figure out where in space the sound's originating from. Now, note, to be able to localize where sound is, your threshold at any particular frequency has to be within 10 decibels of each other. I'm going to give the most extreme example. Now, if you had normal hearing in your right ear and no hearing in your left, you are not going to be able to tell where sounds are coming from because all the sounds will sound like they're coming from the right. Now, certain people who are born this way learn somehow to figure out a little bit where the sounds are, but they're still not going to be able to localize sounds. Also, people with hearing loss in one ear, like if unilateral deafness, will fall apart in noise because the noise and what they want to listen to is all going through one ear and the brain cannot separate it. So, okay, so now we'll go on. So to be able to localize the different sounds, to separate in a party, again, if people with normal hearing and no processing issues, or if you have hearing aids, if you're in a party and you want to listen to one person and to ignore everything else, your brain has to be able to separate all different sounds, and then your brain can attend to what you want to listen to, a particular talk, and block out everything else. So it's very important for your ability in group conversation. It's not just the noise level, but your brain has, especially in a party or at dinner or etc., that your brain has to be able to separate all these different sounds. If it cannot, you're going to fall apart in a group setting. And this is actually more difficult to hear in a restaurant or in a group setting than to hear someone talking and the dishwasher going. Because the dishwasher is just noise and you have speech and they're very different. But when you have four people talking, then you need to be able to separate where these people are located and then to attend to it. Okay, so that's what we were saying there. Now, if you have this decreased this ability to separate the sound sources, as I said, it's been shown to decrease with hearing loss. So the more hearing loss you have, the more difficult it's actually to separate the sound sources as well. Also, aging can affect your ability to separate sound sources, and then you won't do as well in background noise. So now we're leaving and to go to the brain. So the neuroelectric pattern, everything that happens in the brain or the brainstem or the spine, all involve neural impulses and their pattern of impulses. And so the patterns are transmitted from the brainstem to the auditory cortices or auditory receiving centers within each hemisphere. and is within what's called the linguistic or the language region of the cortex, where these neuroelectric patterns are compared to what you've learned in your life about all the sound and what they represent. They are stored in what's called long-term memory in a certain area of the brain. And actually, I won't go into that, but you store it in what's called long-term memory. The language aspect, the linguistic, that's another name for language, the speech sound, the words, the meaning, the grammar, they're all represented or stored in the left hemisphere. For 90, most individuals, 96% of the population have their language for words and their meaning in their left. So if you if you have a stroke in that area, that's going to affect your ability to either process language or produce it. The rhythm of speech is processed in the right hemisphere. The syllable, the rhythm, the stress, the pattern, and that processed in 96%. So for example, if I said, that's a car, that's a car, the words, that's a car, is in the left, but that's a car or that's a car. The ability to tell when the question or a statement is that processed in the right hemisphere. So, so why are the speech sound that make up words, why are they 96% of people in the left hemisphere? Is because the neuron, the brain cells that process speech sounds are very short in duration. Like if I said like P or t, that's only like 1/40th of a second long. So the brain cells that can be able to process those very short, fast changing sound are only in the left hemisphere. And so in order to be able to process the auditory cortex, that part of the brain that receives the sound from other people talking, you have to give a clear representation of all the acoustic aspects of that sound. And if you have a hearing loss or inability to resolve the different aspects of the sound, then the brain is not going to be able to get a clear representation. Now, here's just something most of you or all of you may have never seen before. This is a software program that shows you how different speech sounds making up words are represented. So one is the word sip and the other one ship. And on the bottom here, you'll see a line going from 0 to 1,500 milliseconds, which means from 0 to 1.5 seconds. So that's time. And then on the what's called the y-axis or the vertical axis represents frequency from very low frequency, like my own voice, oh, to very high frequency. Now you'll see the main difference between this represents the S, the I, and the P. And these are all the aspects of those sounds that make up. And I wish I could go into greater detail. But the reason why I chose this, you'll see that the S is different than the SH. The S is concentrated in a very high frequencies or pitches, while the SH is more spread out and goes into lower frequency. Now, if you had a high frequency hearing loss where you could not hear at 4,000 hertz and above, then what would happen is in the S, you would not hear any of the S sound at all. It would be too high a pitch for you to hear, and all you would hear is ip. With ship, however, even though you would lose a lot of the aspect, the higher frequencies, 4,000 and above, you would still get enough to maybe be able to hear ship. So in the first case, you hear ip, and then you still hear ship. So if I said sip, now you may not know what word it really is. So in order for the brain to be able to derive the speech sound or that represent them, it's got to have all the aspects of that make up each speech sound. So here's the left hemisphere, and this is the right hemisphere. And this is the region, the auditory receiving area, and the language region that derives speech sound. And you'll see the terms fast, short. It looks at time, very fast time, and it developed what are called phonemes or phonic. Those are the individual speech sounds. But in the right hemisphere, the neuron cannot process those short duration speech sounds, much longer, slower, and gives you the rhythm of speech. For example, here, and I'm going to use a different, like if I said, if you could hear or T versus ah, ah, that's much longer. That's going to be in the right, and this speech sounds on the left. So that's why you have language and then the rhythm in the right. Now, as mentioned earlier, permanent hearing loss occurs due to the loss of the hair cells in the various frequency regions. So not only if you have a hearing loss will the sound need to be louder, but the more hearing loss you have, you're also going to have decreased ability to distinguish, discriminate, to resolve the speech sound. So even if I was to make the ability for you to be able to hear a p or a p, like in Paul or t in tall, you may hear them, but you may not be able to tell the difference between them. Hearing aids basically make louder, but they cannot give you that resolution back. It's like the TV set. You can, in the old TV set, if it wasn't a clear picture, you can make brighter, but you don't necessarily make it more clearer. So it's important to understand there's a limit to what hearing aids can do, or cochlear implants. Now, the speech sound that have been extracted in the auditory cortex and the language region, then they get bundled together, and the speech sounds are called phonemes, and they get combined into syllables. So you can have a p, ah, o, and that becomes Paul, or k, o, k, that becomes cook. So you can, or upstairs. So you can, the sound becomes syllables or words forms. And over time, these word forms are really like based of neurons, brain cells that become a hub, and they represent not only the speech sounds, but the speech sounds that are combined into what's called an auditory word form, connect the different areas of the brain to the visual area, motor, touch, tactile, and even concepts. So, for example, when you hear the word dog, you not only hear the sound d, ah, g, but you may visualize in your mind. I say dog, and I say, think about what a dog is. You'll say, a dog is a four-legged animal. It's a pet. You might see it jumping, sitting, eating, petting. All these concepts get connected. So when you hear a word, your brain is able to derive meaning. And you have all these connections to these little neural hubs throughout the brain that lets you get that. So if all goes well, these neural hubs and connections become organized in a very efficient pattern and allows you quick access. So just think of in a computer, when you want to find something, you go to a folder, just main category, and then you have subcategories or subfolders, and then you go into subfolders until you find your document. And you can do very quickly if you know and organize it. The computers were organized the way we think the brains work. And the information that's in your brain is stored in that long-term memory. And hopefully it's been organized effectively. So when one is listening, the incoming stimuli are processed, and you process, you derive the speech sound, they become the word form, and then the speech sound will find the representation of long-term memory. And that's called lexical. Lexical means vocabulary or words. So lexical access is accessing all your vocabulary in your brain. If there's a match between the stimulus that's coming in and you paid enough attention to it, I'm sure there are times where someone's talking, but you've been thinking about work or thinking about your family or life. You're hearing them, but if somebody asks you after, hey, what did I say? And then you say, sorry, I was thinking about something else. So you have to pay attention. Attention's critical. So if there's a match between what someone says and what you have in your memory, then that representation memory will be activated. And when it gets activated, that's the only time when it's in what's called your short-term or conscious memory. So your conscious memory, when others are talking, is the activation of what you've learned over time is stored in your long-term memory. That particular a word that someone says, activate and then you're aware of what's been said. But it has to be done quickly on the fly. We're talking about each word only has a quarter of a second. Most people can process up to 4 words a second, 3 to 4 words. You don't have time to play around if you want to keep up. And that's known as lexical access speed. And because hearing loss results in not being able to hear or discriminate the different sounds, you're missing acoustic information. It makes it harder to derive the speech sound, define the word, and so hearing loss may create many possible matches for a word. I'm giving you an example. Let's say I said the word spat, S-P-A-T, but you have a hearing loss um, in the high frequencies and significant enough where you can't hear certain sounds like P or even S. So if I present in a sentence, if you have a hearing loss, you may only hear the at. Matter of fact, you may only hear ah, but we'll pretend you hear at. But you don't hear the SP. In addition to the at, now you have to figure, okay, so what did the person say? Well, there's similar words. It could be pat, it could be cat, it could be scat, it could be stat. So how do you decide what the word actually was? So to do that, you have to rely on what's called top-down processing. That's where you use your knowledge of language, your world knowledge to figure it out. So if I said that person was so angry, and you heard he at someone, then you're going to say, oh, he spat at them, for example. That's the example of one. So you fill in the missing words. But that takes time. Now, you're not doing consciously, your brain is doing this, but it still needs time to, because it's not getting accurately, so it's got to use all the other information and language and cognition and world knowledge to figure out what that word might have been. So automatically, when you have a hearing loss, you have a processing problem. And the processing problem is you're going to need more time to keep up. I don't know if I said it here, but that's why people with hearing loss need other people to talk a little bit slower and clearer. It gives the brain enough time to fill it in. But aging can disrupt the process. You may lose neurotransmitters. The brain, over time, you lose brain cells, you lose neuron transmitters, you lose the ability to connect quickly, you lose myelin. But some people lose it more quickly than others. So as you get older, that's why older seniors need longer processing time, not only for hearing, but for reading, for figuring out things. We don't process things as quickly as we did when we were younger. And so aging can do that too. So even seniors without any hearing loss, they may need others to talk more slowly. Now, it should be noted that many of the brain regions or cognitive regions involved when listening are the same one. They're the same one involved when you're talking. Because when you're talking, you don't just say a word, you're thinking about what you want to say, and you have to find those words. And so or individuals talking must locate the word from the same long-term memory storage region as when listening. So many of the same factors that I mentioned earlier that made your ability to process words quickly will make it harder to locate the word quickly when you want to talk. So as you get older, you might speak a little more slowly, but also you may have difficulty finding the word. That's why you may forget a name over time, or you may forget and not find a word because it takes longer to access and find it and activate it. So that is not so what makes it difficult to go in makes it also difficult to get out. Now, the rhythm in the right hemisphere that I talked about before gets integrated or combined with the words or the language sound in the left hemisphere, and it does so by what's called the corpus callosum. This is a tract of highly myelinated nerve fibers, highly myelinated. The myelin sheath is very elaborate in these cochlear regions, and it connects the two hemispheres. Please note it's one of the last structures to develop in the brain. It only matures at the age of 12 or 13, but it's also one of the first to deteriorate starting at around the age of 45, 50. And that's because the myelin may start deteriorating over time, and so the transmission gets slower and not as effective. So I call this auditory linguistic integration. It has to be done in flight. So, for example, when I said before, or I give a different one, that's a book. That's a book. You have to integrate, combine the rhythm and the words at the same time. And as I said, myelin speed neurotransmission. So if you lose myelin, that fatty substance that covers the nerve fibers as a result of aging, then you're going to have slower neurotransmission and take longer to process information. So here, the right hemisphere, here's the left, and here is the part, these are the nerve fibers, or what's called a white tracts, where information goes and flows between the hemispheres and communicate with each other. And that's what allows you to be able to use that rhythm with the words effectively. We're getting close to the end. As mentioned earlier, once the neural representation has been activated from long-term memory, it's in your short-term memory. That's the only time it's consciously aware. You have billions of facts in your brain, but at any one point in time, you're limited maybe to 4 or 5 things that you can be active at any one point in time. That's it. And that's the only time you're aware of it. So it's called your conscious memory. And that short-term memory is only if you don't do anything, when someone says something, it'll only last in your short-term memory for 2 to 3 seconds, unless you pay attention and then keep on rehearsing or keeping it in your memory, attending to it. So this ability to maintain information in short-term memory is due to a part of the brain that regulates attention to the areas you want to keep firing. That is the information you want to keep in your conscious memory. You need a part of your brain that directs attention. So you have to, for example, if I said a phone number, you have to repeat the number and then you have to repeat it again and again. That's a form of attention. If you did not repeat it to yourself, you would not remember the earlier numbers. They would be gone. So it's your ability to do what's called maintenance attention, to keep the information in your conscious memory. So if you're unable to maintain information or attention, then the earlier information fades rapidly from memory. Problem is, the region in the brain that directs and coordinates attention is very prone to the effects of aging. And so so if you cannot direct attention, this decreased attention means it's gonna affect your ability to hold information in your short-term memory, especially the early information, and to remember it later on. Also, without going into it, people would hear the more hear when you have hearing loss, it also affects your ability to hold information in your short-term memory. Forgot to add that in before, but I could explain why later. So please note, this is not the same type of memory issues as like in dementia, because dementia involves difficulty remembering information from long ago, historical information that you've stored over time. Then the information you've processed has to be maintained in the same order that was presented. There is different brain structures involved. If I give you a series of directions, it's not enough to be able to hear all the words. It's not even enough to hear the sentences or phrases. You've got to remember if I said, hey, I want you to go out, close the door, look for the wallet outside, bring it back to me. You've got to remember in the correct order. Otherwise, you're going to have difficulty doing it correctly. However, these same structures also deteriorate as a function of aging. Again, more another some people and others. And so you may forget or you may not be able to recall the correct sequence, especially for new information that you've been presented with. Now, the last thing I think, and then we'll summarize, I think, is listening in the presence of noise. Individuals must often listen in background noise. That's the number one complaint for most people. But I will say, I have a severe hearing loss. I want to be able to at least hear in quiet everybody talks about difficulty in noise, but I want to be able to hear in quiet because I spend about 85% of my time in quiet. If I can't hear in quiet when I'm one-to-one, then what do I care about noise? Noise is only 15%. But for people with mild hearing loss who have no difficulty in quiet, where they fall apart is the noise. So that's why it's a big thing where people talk about. And we often have to listen to background noise. Now, in order to do so, you have to direct attention. And when you direct attention, what does that mean? It's excite the neurons that correspond to what you want to listen to. And you've got to inhibit or block the neurons that correspond to the competing, irrelevant stimuli that you don't want to listen to. There are many reasons why you may have difficulty in background noise, some of which I already mentioned earlier. You may have hair cell loss or nerve loss. You might have difficulty localizing the different sound sources, and then you cannot separate them, and so you'll fall apart in group settings. You may have difficulty allocating to what you want to listen to while blocking out competing stimuli, or the amount of effort that you have to put in to process the target stimuli while blocking out the background noise is greater than your ability to do that task. I was hoping to show something here, and if you want in the question, then I'll show. But I had this figure. I'm just going to say the load represents what you have to do. Capacity is what genetically you're able to do. If what you have to do to listen to others, and because of your hearing loss, you don't hear all the sound, and you have to engage thinking and processing and figuring out, then you may take up all of this capacity just to do it in quiet. And then when you have to block out noise, then that extra amount of work just exceeds your capacity and you fall apart and you break down, you have difficulty in noise. So in summary, hearing loss can impact spoken language by, and these are the things, I'm just summarizing what we did. You have decreased ability to do these binaural comparisons of time and intensity to localize different sound sources in the brainstem. You have the decreased audibility to acoustic information because you don't hear all just different acoustic aspects of speech sound. Even if you make them audible by hearing aid or cochlear implant, you may have difficulty still discriminating the differences. And if you cannot hear all the speech sound, that's going to result in you needing more time, and you need to keep up with the talker. You need more processing, top-down processing to keep up. The effect of age, and also it can affect short-term memory too. That aging can impact spoken language in a number of ways, and I mentioned you'll have a decreased ability to allocate attention effectively, possibly, and in turn it can impact the ability to attend to a target talker in the face of competing talkers or noise. It may affect your ability to hold information in your short-term memory. Aging can make it more difficult to process information quickly, to find the words, or you may need more time to figure out what the words were said. And you may have increased difficulty coordinating between the two hemispheres. Okay, I'm going to stop now, but I wanted you to know there's a whole slide here on oral rehabilitation, and I talk about components. And if you ever want, I can talk about that in the future, and I talk about a software program that's available, and then my bio. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. And what happened?
Thank you so
Uh-oh.
much, Larry.
I hear you and I don't see you. Let me see if I can get back here. Oh, there. Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay. You want